Welcome to the History of North America. I'm Mark Vinette. As we move towards a deep dive into the golden age of New France, let's first set the table with a wrap-up of the founding and early development of the fledgling colony. At the start of the 17th century, the initial phase of European exploration of the North American continent slowly began to move towards colonization. This early fledgling colonial movement was in need of strong, talented, and determined leaders. The Roman Catholic countries of Western Europe furnished a market that made the perilous Atlantic Ocean voyage worthwhile, even if it were made just to reach the immensely rich fishing waters to gather the harvest of the sea instead of the spices and jewels of the Orient. Almost every year after John Cabot's historic 1497 voyage, an international mixture of fishing vessels could be seen on the offshore fisheries southeast of Newfoundland and east of Nova Scotia, Canada. Occasionally, such ships even cruised into the Gulf of St. Lawrence. At times, their crews encountered Amerindians along the shores who were willing to part with valuable furs in exchange for articles manufactured in Europe. When it was realized that only the wilds of an unexplored New World had been discovered, there was a spirit of disillusionment in Europe. Gradually, however, this feeling was replaced by a fresh interest in North America, for Spaniard adventurers were reported to be bringing home rich cargoes of gold and silver from the Caribbean and Mexico. 10 years after French monarch Francis I sent navigator Giovanni da Verrazzano on a voyage of reconnaissance overseas, he followed up by dispatching an expedition under skilled mariner Jacques Cartier. On his voyage of 1534, Cartier sailed a route that was for the most part already well known by captains of transatlantic fishing vessels. Cartier's voyage, however, was an official exploring expedition, and its immediate result was a thorough report for the French king about the lands he had seen and the people he had met. He visited and named most of the important coasts on the Gulf of St. Lawrence and observed near Anticosti Island that he might be in the mouth of a great river. The mighty St. Lawrence River is a large waterway in the middle latitudes of North America, flowing from Lake Ontario in a northeasterly direction into the world's largest estuary, the Gulf of St. Lawrence. The river connects the Great Lakes to the North Atlantic Ocean and forms the primary drainage outflow of the Great Lakes Basin. Its drainage area is the world's largest system of freshwater lakes. The basin covers parts of Ontario and Quebec in Canada, parts of Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, Vermont, and nearly the entirety of the state of Michigan in the United States. The river becomes tidal around Quebec City. The river traverses the Canadian provinces of Ontario and Quebec, as well as the state of New York, and is part of the international boundary between Canada and the USA. It also provides the basis for the commercial St. Lawrence Seaway. The Vikings explored the Gulf of St. Lawrence in the 11th century and were followed by 15th and early 16th century European fishermen and mariners. At that time, the land along the river was inhabited by the St. Lawrence Iroquoians. As mentioned, the St. Lawrence River is partly within the United States and as such is that country's sixth oldest surviving European place name. Until the early 17th century, the French used the name Rivière du Canada, or Canada River, to designate the St. Lawrence upstream to Montreal, and the name Ottawa River after Montreal. The modern country of Canada is one of the three nations this series is built upon. While a variety of theories have been postulated for the name of Canada, its origin is now accepted as coming from the Amerindian word Kanata, meaning village, settlement, cluster of dwellings, or collection of huts. In other words, an Amerindian community. The demonym Canadien, or Canadien in French, once referred exclusively to the indigenous groups who were native to the territory. Its use was extended over time to the colonial French settlers of the land, and later the English settlers. Today, French-language Canadians refer to themselves as Canadiens Français. Let's examine the exploits of Samuel de Champlain, better known in English as Champlain, the father of New France. In his early 30s, experienced seaman Samuel Champlain joined the crew aboard the Saint-Julien on his first transatlantic crossing. This journey lasted 2 years and gave Champlain the opportunity to learn about Spanish holdings from the Caribbean to Mexico City. Along the way, he took detailed notes, wrote an illustrated report on what he learned on the trip, and gave this secret account, entitled Narrative of a Voyage to the West Indies and Mexico, 1599 to 1601, to his king, Henry IV, who rewarded Champlain with an annual pension. To comprehend Champlain, we must understand the character of the king he served so faithfully. When Henry IV converted to Catholicism in 1596 to end France's history of savage internecine warfare and unite the capital, he famously quipped, "Paris is well worth a mass." Samuel Champlain's powerful friendship and special relationship with his monarch, King Henry IV, is in part well documented, but also shrouded in mystery. Henry's many favors to Champlain and his family were acts of extraordinary largesse. What was the origin of this special relationship between a great king, a family of humble origins, and a youth of modest rank? Throughout his life, Samuel de Champlain was a loyal Catholic soldier. As a young man, he learned to fight with the firearms of his time, acquiring this practical knowledge when serving with the army during the later stages of France's religious wars involving the Holy Catholic League in Brittany from 1594 to 98. During this time, he attained the rank of captain. His soldiering skills, along with his talents as a navigator and geographer, would later serve him well during his many adventures in North America. King Henry IV wanted the French to begin settling in the New World in hopes that wealth could be brought back to France. So he sent an expedition in 1603 to locate a place on the North American continent to establish a colony and fur trade settlement. Although he held no official title at the time, Samuel Champlain would be among the men who would take part in this great venture. In 1604, King Henry IV granted a fur monopoly to a French noble who led a colonizing expedition to an island located near the mouth of the St. Croix River, which in time was to mark the international boundary between the Canadian province of New Brunswick and the American state of Maine. In the spring of 1605, France's St. Croix settlement was moved to a new site across the Bay of Fundy on the shore of the Annapolis Basin, an inlet in western Nova Scotia. Here, at Port Royal, France's most successful colony to date was established. The general area came to be known as Acadia. Among the lieutenants on this undertaking was a geographer named Samuel de Champlain, who promptly carried out a major exploration of the northeastern coastline of what is now the United States. In 1608, he founded France's first permanent Canadian colony, which he named Quebec, an indigenous word meaning where the river narrows. This strategic location was at the foot of a great rocky cape on the north shore, which formed a natural fortress barring the way upstream to the interior. The early years of the Quebec colony were hard, and the population grew slowly. Champlain administered its affairs and took personal charge of an organized exploration of the unknown interior. In 1608, Samuel de Champlain founded France's first permanent Canadian colony, which he named Quebec, an indigenous word meaning where the river narrows. This strategic location was at the foot of a great rocky cape on the north shore, which formed a natural fortress barring the way upstream to the interior. The early years of the Quebec colony were hard, and the population grew slowly. Champlain administered its affairs and took personal charge of an organized exploration of the unknown interior. During the summer of 1609, Samuel de Champlain attempted to form better relations and alliances with the local First Nations tribes, including Wendat Hurons, Algonquins, and Montagnais, who lived in the area of the St. Lawrence River. These tribes sought Champlain's help in their war against the Haudenosaunee, also known as the Iroquois Confederacy, League, or Five Nations. The founder of New France set off with his men to explore the Rivière des Iroquois, now known as the Richelieu River, and became the first known European to lay eyes on and map one of the continent's majestic bodies of water, named Lake Champlain in his honor. On July 29, 1609, somewhere in the area near Ticonderoga and Crown Point in Upper New York State, a battle took place that had a significant effect on relations between the French and the Iroquoian Mohawks. While the Battle of Lake Champlain cowed the Iroquoian Mohawks for some years, they would later return to fight the French and Algonquin for the rest of the century. The Battle of Sorel occurred in June 1610, when Samuel de Champlain, supported by the Kingdom of France and his native allies, fought against the Mohawk people in New France at present-day Sorel-Tracy, Quebec, my city of birth. Champlain's forces, armed with the arquebus long gun, engaged and defeated the Iroquois. The battle ended major hostilities with the Mohawks for 20 years. Native communities in southeastern Canada and northern New York State warred amongst themselves long before the arrival of Europeans on the continent. By the early 17th century, however, new alliances were formed, and the Iroquois became mortal enemies of the French. Samuel de Champlain ran the fledgling colony of New France and took personal charge of organized explorations of the unknown interior of the continent. Where Champlain did not actually travel himself, he sent other men. One was Coureur des Bois, or wood runner, Étienne Brûlé, the first white man to cross Pennsylvania and later the first to see Lake Superior, the greatest of the Great Lakes. In 1615, Samuel Champlain journeyed by canoe up the Ottawa River, through Lake Nipissing, and down Georgian Bay to the heart of the Huron country, near Lake Simcoe. During these journeys, Champlain aided the indigenous Hurons in battles against the Iroquois Confederacy. As a result, the Iroquois became mortal enemies of the French. The Company of 100 Associates, or Company of New France, was a French trading and colonization enterprise chartered in 1627 by Chief Minister to King Louis XIII, Cardinal Richelieu, to capitalize on the North American fur trade and to expand French colonies there. The company was granted a monopoly to manage the fur trade in the colonies of New France, which were at that time centered on the St. Lawrence River Valley and the Gulf of St. Lawrence. In return, the company was supposed to settle French Catholics in New France, but were actually more interested in trade than in colonization, which was usually a drain on the company's finances. Samuel Champlain, who championed the colonization efforts, worked tirelessly to make sure the French colonies survived amid political and corporate changes of power. An English fleet left Britain in 1628 for the St. Lawrence River, led by the adventurer privateer Kirk Brothers. Samuel de Champlain, anxiously awaited relief ships from France to feed the residents of Quebec, who were on the point of starvation. In 1629, the 5 Kirke brothers, now aware of the desperate conditions facing the Quebecers, demanded a French surrender of the fort, settlement, and fur trading post. Champlain suffered the humiliation of having to surrender his almost starving garrison to an English fleet that appeared before Quebec. He was taken as a prisoner, but was granted all the honors of war, and was escorted by one of the Kirkes to England, where he learned that the war between France and England had been over for 3 months by the time Quebec had surrendered. Champlain immediately launched a campaign to annul the conquest of New France, and Charles I of England agreed to return Canada to France on condition that King Louis XIII pay the English monarch certain debts. At the request of French minister Cardinal Richelieu, Champlain returned to New France to spend his few remaining years. Quebec had been devastated by the Kirkes, and now he faced the daunting task of rebuilding it. His next priority was to convert the natives to the Catholic faith, though his motives were more commercial than religious, writing, "There are enough people in these places who hope to have a number of Frenchmen and religious to instruct them in our faith. This will increase the practice of religion and ensure an incredible trade in furs. Catholic Huron would go to heaven, but in the meantime, they would bring France as many beaver skins as possible." Champlain became governor of New France in 1633, but was getting old and tired. His colony had taken root. It now had 400 inhabitants and an active mission in Huronia. One dark note was the fate of his protégé, Étienne Brûlé, who made a fatal mistake by trading with the Iroquois. The rival Huron were furious and allegedly tortured, killed, and ate him. Terrified by Champlain's possible reaction to the death of a man he considered his son, the Huron decided not to come down to Quebec to trade that year. In 1635, after winter had set in, Champlain died peacefully on Christmas Day in the beloved settlement he had founded, Quebec City. Quebec owed its existence to his tenacity and perseverance. Through his many alliances, wars, court intrigues, and maneuvers in matters of religion, he stubbornly clung to the dream of creating a profitable colony for France. Champlain left the world a prolific body of writings that provide an invaluable window into the challenging, yet fascinating, early period of a fledgling New France. In the thousands of pages he wrote, he always remained discreet about himself, but not about his love for the colony he'd founded. I'm Mark Vinette, and I hope you're enjoying the ride.